Well, hey there, and welcome to Wedding Planning Simplified. I'm Amy from Unmistakably You, and we are here with you today, actually not live because I am off with my family seeing a show, but we are here with you today to talk about dealing with unpredictable weather, which may be something that you are thinking about if you're planning a wedding for this upcoming summer. As you know, here in Ontario, we deal with some pretty unexpected things in terms of weather. It can change on a dime. You might have a beautiful day and all of a sudden a thunderstorm blows up. So, we wanted to talk today about ways to deal with that in the sort of thick of things on your wedding day. We come to you every week with the goal of helping to ease some of your stresses and anxieties and give you some tips and tricks and tools that you need to plan an amazing wedding and to be prepared for those unexpected things that may happen, one of which, of course, is weather. Now, as you live in Ontario, or even if you live somewhere else, you probably have it in the back of your mind that perhaps the weather on your wedding day might not be absolutely perfect. Now, here in Ontario, we deal with all kinds of snow and sleet and rain and wind and all of those things in the winter as well. But because we are in July and we are dealing with our It's Hot Outside series, we're going to talk today predominantly about those issues that you will feel and focus on if you're dealing with a summer wedding here in Southern Ontario or wherever you might be. And predominantly, those issues are going to be rain, but also you might need to deal with humidity, heat, and even wind. So, we're coming to you today with a number of different tips and thoughts, and hopefully ideas that will help you to be prepared. We, of course, hope that the weather is beautiful and wonderful on your wedding day, but if it's not, here are some things that you will want to be able to do and be prepared for. So, the first, of course, is to have a really strong backup plan. And that's a backup plan that you don't hate. Of course, it's not option A, but hopefully it's an okay enough backup plan that if you do have to implement it, you're not going to be absolutely devastated. So, in the initial stages of the planning, you have to be thinking about what might happen if the weather isn't conducive to having an outdoor wedding. And that plan, hopefully, is something that you are almost as happy to do as your first plan. So if you are at a hotel or a banquet hall or some kind of a golf club, maybe there is an indoor option. Perhaps there's a room inside that you can move to if the first plan of outdoors is not safe or not going to work because of whatever weather happens on your day. And if that is the plan, hopefully the managers of the venue, the on site coordinator will be able to implement that plan for you. And if you're at a venue, there's probably very little that you'll have to worry about in terms of implementing the backup plan. At least that's the hope. Now, if you are on private property, if you're at a barn, you probably will have to think about the plan and who's going to implement it that's not you. And if you don't have a wedding planner or a day of coordinator, you're going to have some people who are on board to help out with that plan, because ultimately on the day of your wedding, you're going to be busy getting ready. Perhaps you're doing a first look in your photography before the ceremony. You're going to have someone on board who's going to help you out with that. And that absolutely should not be you. You shouldn't be making rain calls. You shouldn't be moving chairs. You shouldn't be doing any of that kind of stuff. So you'll need to have a team if you don't have a coordinator to look after these things for you. Now, maybe the rain plan or the heat humidity plan is that you're going to be inside another building. Maybe there's a drive shed or a barn. Now, if this is your rain plan, you'll need to put some time beforehand into making sure that it is safe. I have certainly been in lots of barns with holes in the floor and, creaky rafters and little pitfalls that aren't really safe for guests. So you'll want to make sure, first of all, that it is safe. And if it's looking like rain on the week of the wedding, you might need to put some time into cleaning out that space. If you're in a drive shed, you might have tractors to move. You might have some, oil spills to clean up. And when is that going to happen? Make sure that if you are on private property and this is your backup plan, that you have also allocated time to make that space clean and safe for guests in the event that you do have to use it. If the weather's looking beautiful and the forecast is awesome and there's not a huge danger of thunderstorms or of heat or humidity being too high, then by all means, don't clean it out the week before. But you'll want to kind of keep that on your radar just in case you do have to clean out a space that you're hoping not to have to use, but that if you do have to use it, it will be safe and clean for guests. You'll need to think about the aesthetics of that alternate space. If you do have to pull the plug and say, okay, we're getting married in the drive shed, is it aesthetically going to work for you? What has to happen in terms of moving decor? Are there backdrops? Are there floral arrangements that have to get moved? Is it going to be an acceptable alternative for you in terms of the aesthetics? Or are you going to end up getting married with all of your ceremony photos, in front of the Mack truck that's parked in the back of the shop, and the oil cans and all of the shop's tools and debris that are out? So think about that well in advance so that nobody is frantically running around on the day of the wedding. We've also had a large number of weddings on private property where the ceremony backup plan is at the church down the road. So if that's the case, you're going to need to think about who is the contact at the church. Who has the keys? Are they going to let you in? What time are they going to let you in? Is there, again, decor that needs to get moved? Is there a backdrop? Are there ceremony flowers? Is the florist going to need to be notified that instead of going to the tent or the barn to set up, that they need to go to that church down the road? So having someone in charge of implementing those plans and communicating with the people who are most instrumental in executing them is really important. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago in terms of communicating with vendors and with guests. Now, beyond the ceremony, what else do you need to think about if some kind of weather plan needs to be implemented? If it does happen to be rainy, but you're still having your reception in the tent or in the barn, you'll need to think about areas of high traffic where the ground might be wet. So those prime locations would be the area outside the washrooms, the area outside the bar. So you'll need to have a plan for keeping those areas a little bit drier so that they don't turn into mucky, soupy messes. Some things to think about might be having wood chips on hand, or straw, or big rubber mats like those industrial ones that are often used in barns. So thinking about how you're going to keep those areas from getting really soupy and messy and yucky. If guests are going to be traveling to areas outside your tent or your barn, like to washrooms or to the parking lot, perhaps, how are you going to keep them dry? Are you going to have a large supply of umbrellas on hand? You also want to think about lighting for those areas, and that's not necessarily a weather-related issue. It's just something that often people forget, is that if you're parking down the sides of a driveway, maybe there's no light in between the street lights and the barn lights. So think about lighting in terms of keeping your guests safe as well. You'll also want to think about electricity. And as you're planning in advance for your wedding, if you are on private property or at a barn, you obviously need to make sure you have sufficient electricity to run all of the different components that require it. But especially if it's potentially going to be wet and rainy, you need to think about how you're going to keep your guests safe as you're running electricity from wherever the panel is to your DJ or band, to your caterers, to the lighting that you're providing. So make sure that your cords are up off the ground and that people are going to be safe if it does happen to be very, very wet. If there is the possibility, again, that there's rain and you have any elements of your wedding outside of your tent or your barn on private property where they may be happening, if you have your bar, for instance, outside the tent, you might want to think about having a number of pop-up tents that are available to be put up if needed so that your guests are sheltered as they're waiting outside the bar for their drink, or as they're waiting outside the washroom. Maybe you want to have a pop-up tent there. So these are things that you don't necessarily need to set up, but you should definitely have in place just in case they're needed. Now, if you do have to make a rain call or a heat or humidity or a wind call, you'll need to have a couple of items in place to actually successfully communicate that to the guests. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but you'll need to have somebody to make the call. So whether that's a coordinator, a planner, a friend, a parent, somebody needs to be assigned to make that call that, you know what, the weather is not conducive to having this ceremony outdoors or to using this venue, we're going to have to put plan B into place. So you need to decide who's going to make that call, as well as when they're going to make that call. And then how are you going to communicate that to your guests? And again, check out our video from a couple of weeks ago about communicating details to guests and vendors if last minute changes have to be made. We won't go into that again today, but make sure that you are clear with the person who's making the call as to when that call needs to be made, and that somebody's in charge of letting the guests know. And what has to happen if that call is made? Are there chairs that have to be moved? Is there decor that has to be transferred? Who's going to do that? So make sure that everybody's on the same page about that, so that you, as you are off getting ready, don't have to worry, because you trust the people who are in place to make that call and communicate that information to any guests or vendors who need to know. Now, communicating with the guests, like I said, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but just to kind of quickly recap, you'll need to make sure that if there has to be a ceremony rain plan, for instance, that it's communicated as far back as your initial invitation. It should be on your website if you have one. You need to decide who makes that call and when it's made, and then how do the guests know if that plan has changed? Is there an email chain? In which case you draft up an email and you don't send it. You have someone in charge of sending it an hour or two before the ceremony so that guests know, oh, we actually have to go to that church down the road. You need to make sure that you have some way of connecting with guests, whether it's email, whether it's a phone chain, whether it's maybe even people standing at that first location. If they're coming to private property for the ceremony and now we are at the church down the road, maybe you need to station somebody at the driveway of the private property saying, actually, we're at the church. It's a mile up the road on the left. Keep an eye out. So making sure that guests get to where they need to be. And that shouldn't be your problem. That should be someone else. Find a cousin who needs a job or an uncle who wants to help out. Now, understand also that weather could happen at any point. So you may be lucky enough to have your ceremony outside. And then what if in Southern Ontario, we're famous for humidity thunderstorms springing up? You know, it could happen at any point. That's why oftentimes on a really hot, humid day, you see a 40% chance of thunderstorms that 9 times out of 10 don't happen. But what if that 1 time out of 10 happens to fall on your wedding day? You want to be aware and able to accommodate for any unpredictable weather that happens at any point during the day. So you'll need to think through, what happens if you're in a tent and that tent becomes unsafe? What if high winds all of a sudden spring up? You'll need to think about if there's an indoor location to move to, if you are outside in a tent or in a barn or in a pavilion or something like that. Is there, if you're in a pavilion at a golf course, is there an indoor banquet room that you can come into to seek shelter if need be? Other than rain, keep in mind that there are additional weather concerns that we deal with here in Southern Ontario and at lots of other places, no matter where your wedding is happening. You might have extreme heat, which could be very, very dangerous, particularly for any guests with compromised immune systems or elderly guests. We might have high humidity, which can lead to problems for people with any kind of breathing issues, particularly if they're still wearing masks. So we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks in terms of guest comfort, but think about providing shade, providing cold drinks, perhaps providing fans for guests. And like I said, don't forget about wind either. We're going to talk a little bit more about wind at the end of August. We're doing an Honest August series, and we're going to talk about a lot of things that you may not consider when you're planning your wedding, and some lies that people tell you about your wedding. And so stay tuned for that during August. But in the meantime, just be very mindful that, of course, you hope and we hope that the weather is absolutely beautiful and perfect on your wedding day. But if any component of your wedding is either outdoors or in a tent or in a barn or another sort of unclimate controlled facility, just put some time and effort into thinking about that rain plan, that heat plan, that humidity plan. We hope that you don't have to execute that plan, We hope that your day is perfect and just warm enough and just overcast enough that your photos are beautiful. But if you do have a solid plan in place, you will feel a lot more comfortable. Your anxiety will be lower. And if you do have to put that plan into place, you can still have a wonderful and fun party with your guests. You'll get to celebrate with everyone. May not be plan A, but at least everyone will be safe and comfortable. So as always, I'm Amy. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Amy at unmistakably.you.com. You can leave a message on this video. If you watched the video and found anything helpful at all in here, please just type it into the comments, say hi, say, hey, this was great. Say, hey, I appreciate you taking your time to do this. We sometimes feel we're talking to nobody out there in cyberspace. So we do love to hear from you, and let us know how your wedding planning is going. If there's anything we can do to help, we are always here. Happy planning. Have a great weekend and take care. Bye-bye.